Elric Marin had lived his life among husks, discarded freighters, twisted engines, dead satellites. He patched them together, scavenged what was still breathing, and buried what wasn't. Meridia 6, the outermost rock of the Priath Fringe, was where things went to be forgotten. Elric preferred it that way. There were no people, no noise, no wars, just rust, fire, and the quiet hum of machines. The day the sky bled silver, everything changed. He'd been working on a faulty ion turbine outside his shed, the sun turning, the sand into burning glass when he saw the object crash. It didn't fall. It spiraled, limbs stretched, wings limp, glowing faintly as it sliced through the upper atmosphere. Elric watched, frozen, as it tore a line through the clouds and vanished into the jagged cliffs west of the wreck basin. He should have ignored it. Whatever it wasn't his problem. Probably another scavenger shot down by pirates or a meteor chunk skimming too close. But something inside him pulled. That quiet mechanic's instinct, the one that had saved lives back in the war, when ships were screaming and he was the only one who could get them off the ground. That instinct said, "Go now." He mounted his old crawler and gunned it toward the cliffs. The crater was massive, still steaming, the sand scorched black. Debris was scattered everywhere, scrap metal, melted armor, broken carbon plating. But none of it made sense. The fragments weren't ship-grade. They curved unnaturally, like bones. Elric climbed down the edge, careful not to burn his boots, and then he saw her. She lay curled at the crater's center, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. An enormous creature, maybe 15 meters long, tail wrapped tight around a twisted frame of wings bent at impossible angles. Her scales were white, almost translucent, glowing faintly with pulses of light that flickered like dying stars. Barnacle-like wounds dotted her limbs. Her wings, cracked and slashed, were folded painfully underneath her body. Her eyes fluttered, weakly, glowing like twin moons. A dragon. Elric knelt beside her, his breath caught in his throat. She was alien, no question. Nothing native to Meridia or any known world. Something older. Something lost. She was dying. He moved slowly, hands out. "Hey now," he murmured, his voice soft against the heat and ash. "I'm not going to hurt you." She growled, low and pitiful, barely lifting her head. A claw scraped the dirt. Her entire body trembled. Elric made a choice. "All right," he said. "Come on, girl. Let's fix you." He didn't wait for approval. He dug a makeshift sled from his crawler, wrapped her as best he could in emergency netting, and began the longest, roughest ride of his life, back to his compound. The sled groaned with every bump. The dragon whimpered with each jolt. He muttered curses and comfort in equal measure, his hands blistering as he steadied her weight with every turn. By the time they reached the compound, night had fallen. The stars above blinked cold and uncaring. Elric stared up at them once, then looked at the broken creature lying before him. "You fell from there," he whispered. "Let's make sure it wasn't your last flight." Elric cleared the main hangar of his workshop, knocking aside rusted cores and broken shell armor to make room for the dragon's bulk. He laid her across the floor, the lights flickering. Over her strange white skin, over the twitching wounds and shattered wings. Her body radiated heat like a slow-breathing forge, each exhale misting the air with a metallic scent. He worked through the night. He started with her wings, splined, the cracked bone with reinforced steel struts from a defunct glider, and bound them with fusion thread and thermal wraps. He cleaned the barnacle wounds which hissed and smoked beneath the antiseptic foam. They weren't natural, more like living parasites that had tried to root into her flesh. She shuddered each time he touched them, but didn't fight. Some part of her still trusted him, or maybe she was too far gone to resist. He adjusted the temperature in the hangar to match her natural heat, monitored her vitals with modified biosensors meant for shuttle cores. Every few hours he spoke to her, not because he thought she understood, but because the silence was too heavy otherwise. "I don't know where you came from," he said once, placing a hand on her shoulder as her breathing grew steadier. But I put a hell of a lot uglier things back together. She blinked at him, eyes unfocused but locked onto his face. Her tail curled slightly. Days passed like that. Slow healing, quiet repair. Elric didn't sleep more than an hour at a time. He fed her through a tube crafted from oxygen lines and nutrient packs meant for long-haul pilots. As the wounds scabbed over and the barnacles began to die off, she started to shift, restless. Her breathing deepened, her claws flexed. And then one morning, Elric came in to find her standing, barely swaying, her wings still bound and trembling, but standing. She growled as he approached, not in warning but in recognition. Her head tilted, she sniffed the air. A warm puff of steam escaped her nostrils. Elric stood there, dirty and aching and tired beyond measure, and he smiled. "Look at you," he said. "Told you we'd get you flying again." She stepped forward, heavy paw at a time until her head was level with his chest. And then, gently, she bowed. Elric didn't move. The breath caught in his throat because something passed between them in that moment. Something wordless, ancient. A vow not forged in language, but in pain. Survival and trust. She was still broken, but she was alive, and she would never forget the hands that had lifted her from the ashes. For the first time in weeks, the morning air on Meridia didn't feel like a burden. It was still dry, still full of iron dust and engine rot, but it carried something new. Now, breath. Elric stood at the edge of his compound, staring up at the twin suns as they rose over the canyon's edge. And behind him, the soft thump of padded claws followed. The dragon was awake. She moved carefully, her once crippled wings, still splined, bound in the stabilizers he had rigged from shuttle frame alloys. Though she could barely extend them, she tried each morning, stretching their fractured reach until the bones creaked. Elric would stop what he was doing, watch and wait. She didn't cry out. She never had. He named her Kayla. It came to him when he was tightening the wing brackets one afternoon, the name slipping from his mouth like something he'd carried his entire life. She'd tilted her head when he said it. Not quite an answer, but not rejection either. Kayla began to explore the compound. She'd nose through his scrap heaps, sniff at the hanging wires, and curl up beside the generator when it hummed at night. Her intelligence was unmistakable. She tracked his movements with eerie focus, her eyes not just seeing but reading him. When he cursed at a failed weld, she would thump her tail. When he succeeded, she'd make a deep rumbling sound that vibrated the tools on the walls. Elric started talking more, not just to her but to himself in ways he hadn't since his youth. About engines, about the war, about the stars he once dreamed of chasing. Kayla would sit quietly, her pale head resting on her talons, eyes half-lidded, as if committing every word to memory. The biggest challenge came when he began unbinding her wings. The healing was mostly done, but the strength wasn't there. Her muscles had withered. He constructed braces, floating rails, a sort of harness system with adjustable tension. It looked ridiculous, like he was fitting a battleship for ballet, but it worked. Slowly, day by day, Kayla extended further, lifted higher, held a pose longer. One evening, as the sun turned the canyon walls blood orange, Elric saw her wings fully stretched against the sky. The sight was blinding. The silver lines of her fractures caught the light like glass spun into silk, and her body, once emaciated and limp, had regained its power, its weight, its majesty. She caught him staring, and this time, she growled low and stepped closer, then turned and leapt, not into flight, not yet, but into motion. A run, a dash across the flat clearing, wings flaring behind her. The wind screamed past her, a ghost of the sky she once owned. And when she stopped, her chest was heaving, her eyes locked on his. She was ready. But Elric wasn't. Because deep inside, he knew she would leave soon, and he wasn't sure if his heart could handle that silence again. Elric awoke to the tremble of wind, and silence. His cot was still warm, the shadows long, the sound of the compound generator humming softly in the background. But the air felt hollow. He sat up slowly, wiping grit from his eyes, and called out, "Tla!" Nothing. He tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. The space where she usually slept beside the generator was cold. Her food tray, what he'd rigged from a melted satellite dish, was untouched. The tool rack she'd knocked over last. Knight was still lying on the floor, wires splayed across the workbench like broken vines. She was gone. Elric stepped outside. The sands were fresh with wind trails. Heavy tracks led toward the cliffs, but then faded into nothing. No wing strokes. No claw imprints, just wind. He stood there for a long time, no anger, no fear, just emptiness. He knew she'd go. He'd seen it in the way she stared at the sky these past few days, the way her wings trembled less with each stretch, the way her head tilted at the calls of distant thunderclouds. She didn't belong on the ground, not in rust or silence or among broken things. Still, the ache twisted deep. Elric wandered the compound that day like a man without a map. He cleaned her den, folded the tarp he used to cover her wounds, set aside the worn tools he'd used to splint her bones. He left her name etched on the side of the hangar wall in carbon ink. Kayla, just that. As if by writing it he could tether some part of her here, keep the memory from fading, like all the others he'd lost to time. That night, he sat on the ridge above the crater where he'd first found her. The stars were clear, thousands of them like frost scattered across the black. He imagined her up there beyond the atmosphere, sailing the cosmic currents, a shape of silver fire cutting through the dark. He smiled, though it hurt, because she'd flown again. And somewhere that meant he had too. The silence on Meridia deepened, not in volume, but in weight. Elric had lived alone before Kayla. He knew the rhythms of a life built in quiet. He'd once found peace in the repetitive clank of tools, the hum of reactors, the shriek of grinding metal, but now it all sounded hollow. Kayla had not only filled the empty air but somehow softened the space between each beat of time. Her absence was not like losing a companion, it was like losing gravity. Everything floated, detached, untethered. He threw himself into work. The compound had suffered during Kayla's stay. Clawed panels, shattered beams, bent structural poles from when she tried to fly indoors. He began restoring it piece by piece, not because it needed to be fixed, but because he didn't know how to sit still anymore. Days blurred into weeks. Each morning he woke hoping to hear a familiar thrum of wings. Each night he left the gate open, but she didn't come. Sometimes he swore he saw something move along the horizon, a shadow, a glimmer. Once he even climbed to the tallest ridge and waited for hours. Nothing but sandstorms. The galaxy was vast, after all. She had gone to reclaim it. He had helped her stand, helped her fly. Now he had to let her soar. He kept her name etched across the hangar wall, Kayla, bold now, carved deep with a fusion torch. Below it, he added stars. One for each day since she left. The first row held only 7. The second stretched long. By the end of the month, it wrapped around the hangar twice. On the 50th day, a signal arrived. Not on the standard channels. It burst through the emergency backup frequency he hadn't touched in years. Static at first, then a single image burned into the screen. A dragon, white, in flight. Not Kayla, but close. And beneath it, coordinates. They pointed to a system far beyond any trade route. An unnamed moon, cold and distant, surrounded by dust rings and orbiting a dying blue star. Elric sat frozen in his chair, staring at the blinking light. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the cover off his shuttle, dusted the sand from the panel, and keyed in the jump settings. The engines groaned awake for the first time in a decade, shaking the rust from their bones like an old war dog stretching for battle. She had called, and he was going. The journey took 9 jumps, across 3 neglected way stations and 1 skirmish with scavenger drones near the Kevin Belt. Elric arrived battered, sleep-starved, but burning with purpose. The moon was a silver sphere, cold and fractured with tectonic scars running like veins across its crust. The sky was a haze of blue mist and floating crystal particles that shimmered in perpetual twilight. Elric's shuttle descended into the atmosphere with its shields flickering. He had barely set the ship down when he saw them. Shapes. 4 of them. All the others small, no guards, no welcome party. Just waiting. Kayla. She stood at the crest of a ridge, wings spread, head lifted, majestic as he remembered. Only larger, more radiant. Her scales had deepened into luminous pearl, and at her feet, 3 hatchlings, smaller, with stubby wings, and oversized claws tumbling over each other with uncoordinated joy. Elric stepped out of the shuttle slowly, boots crunching against the brittle frost of the moon's surface. Kayla didn't move, but her eyes, still pale and deep as starlight, fixed on him. Then she walked forward. The hatchlings followed, stumbling, squealing, tripping over their tails. They were beautiful. One had golden horns, another bore a bluish tint to its scales. The smallest trailed last, eyes wide with curiosity. Kayla stopped before him, exhaled softly, a gust of warm breath that melted the frost around her feet. She lowered her head. Elric reached out. His fingers brushed the spot just above her brow, and she closed her eyes, pressing into the touch. It wasn't a greeting. It was a thank you. One hatchling chirped and bit his pant leg. The other sniffed, one batting at the hem of his coat. Kayla didn't stop them. She watched, a quiet pride radiating from every motion. He knelt, and the smallest of the 3 crawled onto his lap and purred. Elric laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in years, I guess I'm family now, he whispered. Kayla raised her head, released a soft trill, and the hatchlings squealed in response. That night, beneath the breathless blue sky of a nameless moon, Elric sat beside a dragon he once healed, surrounded by her children. They built a fire from synthetic logs. He cooked what rations he had, shared them with creatures who didn't eat them, but enjoyed the warmth all the same. Kayla slept with her wings curled protectively around them all, and Elric, for the first time in a lifetime of silence, dreamed of wings, not broken but strong, not falling but flying. Elric stayed on the moon longer than he expected. He hadn't meant to. He packed for a week, maybe 2, a short visit, to say goodbye the right way. To see with his own eyes that Kayla had survived, that she had made a life beyond the wreckage of her fall. He never thought he'd be sleeping beside a nest of half-grown dragons, or waking to their claws scraping against his boots as they tried to pull them off just for fun. But time moved differently there. The sky never darkened, not really. And the light hung in a blue shimmer, giving everything the glow of dreams that refused to end. Kayla had built a home, not of walls or machinery, but of terrain. The hatchlings lived in a hollow beneath a cliff of wind-carved stone, where warm steam curled from geothermal vents and strange blue moss grew in thick carpets. The dragons were safe here, free from the world that once shattered her wings. They had never seen another human before. Elric fascinated them. They followed him when he explored. They mimicked him when he worked on the shuttle. When he bent down to calibrate the driver ray, one of them, Comet he called him, tried to mimic the motion and accidentally rolled down a slope with a screech of delight. Kayla watched them. Always. Her presence was a silent gravity, anchoring everything. The hatchlings obeyed her with a glance. And though she never spoke, her eyes said everything. To Elric, she had brought him here not out of duty, but because she wanted him to see what he'd helped make possible. He hadn't just saved her life. He'd saved generations that hadn't even begun yet. Every day, Elric told them stories around the heat vents. He spoke of the scrapyards of Meridia, of the first time he touched a plasma torch, of the war and the quiet that followed. The dragons didn't understand the words, but they listened, heads tilted, bodies curled like cats beside a fire. Kayla always remained nearby, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow. He found himself building again. Small things, simple things. A perch for Halo, the boldest of the young ones. A climbing ring for Sky. The Flyer, a long, narrow tunnel made of hull plates for Comet, who liked to hide and leap out when least expected. The hatchlings began to anticipate him, pouncing into his arms or climbing his back with squeals of triumph. His coat was shredded. He didn't care. The wound of Kayla's departure, the one he thought had scarred too deep to ever fade, had been replaced with something strange and fuller. It wasn't just healing, it was belonging. One evening, as the dragons dozed, Elric and Kayla stood on the ridge above their nest. She towered beside him, silent as ever. He sipped lukewarm tea from his battered canister. "I don't know what your world was like," he said softly, eyes fixed on the haze of clouds swirling far above. "Or why you fell, but I'm glad you did. If I had to do it again, I'd still carry your broken body through the dunes." Kayla lowered her head and pressed it gently against his shoulder, not with force, but with the weight of knowing. Elric reached up and rested his hand between her eyes. There were no words for what passed between them. Just breath, memory, and the space where love lived, without needing to be spoken aloud. The silence broke the next morning. It began with a flicker, in the sky, faint, high above the clouds like a tear in the air itself. Elric was adjusting the thruster coil outside his shuttle when he felt it. A low hum in his chest, deeper than sound. The kind of vibration that unsettled the bones. Kayla felt it too. She stood stiff as iron, wings partially open. The hatchlings clustered around her legs. Her eyes turned skyward. The clouds rippled like water struck by stone. Elric scrambled up the ridge to get a better look. From the horizon, something was approaching. Not a ship, not quite. It shimmered black and silver, with movements too fluid for metal, too precise for nature. An artificial storm, a hybrid of drone and weapon. Old war, tech, long buried in the catalogs of forbidden engineering. Echo-class retrieval swarm. Elric's blood ran cold. He knew that shape. He'd seen it during the war, once, on the other side of the galaxy, when a rogue research vessel had lost control of its symbiotic AI prototypes. The swarm was their reaper, silent, autonomous, triggered by signatures from bonded organisms that had escaped containment. And Kayla. Kayla had glowed with that same signature once. He remembered the light, the hum, the barnacle scar she'd carried. They'd found her. She was supposed to be dead. And now they'd come to finish the job. He turned to Kayla, heart thundering. "We have to run," but she didn't move. She stood tall, wings slowly unfolding. Elric understood. She wasn't going to run. Not again. The hatchlings growled, low and confused, sensing the tension, but not the reason. Kayla gave a single call, a high, haunting note that rang through the thin air like crystal breaking. The hatchling stilled, obeyed. Sky and Halo flanked Comet and backed into the cave. Kayla turned to Elric and let out a softer sound, curling her wing gently toward him. A shield. A goodbye. "No," Elric whispered, voice cracking. "Not like this. I didn't bring you back just to lose you again." The swarm descended. He ran to his shuttle, yanked open the override panel, and rerouted every ounce of power into the emitter grid. His hands moved like fire, wires, coils, conduits fusing beneath his fingertips. He connected the signal amplifier to Kayla's old medical patch, still stored in the system. A beacon. A pulse. When the swarm reached the ridge, it hesitated. A glitch. A flicker. Then the grid went live. Kayla roared, wings flared, barnacle scars ignited with searing white flame. The sky lit up like dawn on fire. The swarm surged. And Kayla met them in the air. Elric watched through the viewport as light and shadow clashed. Kayla moved like lightning, diving and wheeling, luring the machines into the arc field he'd wired into the cliffs. They struck the trap. The rocks exploded. But more kept coming. Kayla was tireless. Beautiful. Wrath incarnate. And then, one final shriek split the sky. A shockwave burst from her chest. Energy born of pain, memory, rage, and the will of a creature who had once been broken but had risen through it. The swarm died in midair. Fried. Silenced. Fried. Silenced, falling like ashes to the moon's surface. Kayla landed hard, staggered, collapsed. Elric was there before the dust settled. She was breathing. Barely. The hatchlings ran to her, crying out in confusion. Elric placed his hands on her neck, the pulse, weak, fading. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You don't leave now. Not after this." Kayla blinked once, then closed her eyes. Not to leave, to rest. He stayed by her side the whole night. One hand on her scales. 3 little dragons curled against his legs, the stars above flickering with slow-moving peace. She had fought for them. All of them. And in that moonlight silence, Elric Mahar understood the shape of love in its fiercest form. It didn't ask. It didn't plead. It protected. Dawn bled slowly, across the horizon of the silent moon. The sky brushed light across Kayla's body, where she lay curled beside the steaming remnants of the fallen swarm. Her breath came in slow, measured waves, shallow but strong, the rise and fall of a giant. At rest, Elric hadn't left her side. Not when the drones fell, not when the shockwave passed, not even when his hands trembled with fatigue and blood dried in streaks across his sleeves from pulling shrapnel out of her shoulder plates. He'd cleaned what wounds he could, scavenging parts from his shuttle to stabilize a makeshift medbay beside her. The hatchlings lay curled tightly against their mother's flank, too tired to chirp, too stunned by what they'd witnessed. Halo, the boldest, kept glancing at Elric as if seeking reassurance that everything would be all right. He whispered to them, kept his voice calm, his hands steady. But inside, something felt hollow. Watching Kayla lie there, barely conscious, tore at him in a way he couldn't have predicted. She had shielded them all, again, and the cost was still being counted. Sometime in the mid-morning hours, Kayla stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open. Her head rose just enough for her eyes to meet Elric's. The glow behind them had dimmed, not in strength, but in weariness, like a star that had burned too hot, too long, and needed time to cool. "You scared the hell out of me," Elric said, kneeling beside her and resting his forehead against her snout. She exhaled, and the breath was warm against his face. For a long moment, there was nothing else. No words, no movement, just that connection. Built from pain, forged through loyalty and love. Then she looked toward the sky. The clouds had broken above them, torn open by the force of her battle. And through the gap, Elric saw something that caught his breath. Ships, dozens of them. But not black, not hostile, not machines of war. These had markings, tribal, elegant, curled, in symbols unlike anything human. Some shimmered like wings in the sunlight. Kayla let out a low, trembling call, a summons, a signal. The hatchlings stirred. Sky stood first, chirping softly. Comet followed, nuzzling Kayla's chest. Kayla blinked at the sky and trilled in return. The ships descended slowly, cautious, respectful. Elric rose as one came to rest at the edge of the ridge. Its ramp unfolded with a whisper. From within stepped a figure, tall, draped in iridescent cloth, silver hair flowing in the low-gravity wind. Their eyes, violet and ancient, locked onto Kayla, then onto him. "You are the one who mended her wings," the figure said. Elric nodded. The alien walked closer, gaze never wavering. "She was the last of the starboard clutch lost in battle. We mourned her centuries ago." Elric swallowed. She wasn't lost, she was just broken. Broken wings do not return to the sky, not unless someone teaches them how. The alien knelt beside Kayla and laid a glowing hand on her scales. A faint shimmer passed between them. Kayla blinked once. The alien smiled. She remembered who she was because of you. Elric looked down at his hands. I didn't do much. You did everything. A low sound vibrated through the ground. Another dragon, massive, white and blue with translucent wings, landed behind the envoy. It looked at Kayla, then bowed, low. Kayla stirred again, lifting her head higher. The envoy turned to Elric. She will fly with her kin again. Her hatchlings will be raised among the stars. But she wishes something before she goes. Elric's heart clenched. What? She wants you to come with her. The ship rose slowly into orbit, trailing light through the shattered sky. As the surface of the moon grew smaller beneath them, Elric stood in the observation chamber, the key. Walls made of something softer than glass, clearer than air. The stars blazed around them, but his eyes stayed on the family at the far end of the room. Kayla lay stretched along a cradle of support vines, her breathing easy now. Her hatchlings played nearby, chasing spheres of levitating light, their wings stronger already, their laughter ringing like wind chimes. Elric had accepted without hesitation. He didn't need Meridia anymore, or the scrapyards, or the rust. Those belonged to a life he'd already lived. This was something else, something new. He approached Kayla slowly. She turned her head, gazing up at him with ancient calm. I guess I'm not much of a mechanic out here, he said quietly. Kayla rumbled in her chest, a sound that vibrated through the floor and into his bones. Then she moved. Strength returned to her body. She stood tall, her wings unfolded, completely, for the first time since he had met her. They filled the chamber, each feathered edge edged with white flame, majestic and terrifying. The scars were still there, but they glowed now, not like wounds, but like stars that had survived collapse and risen anew. Elric stared in awe. Kayla looked down at him once more, then lowered her head and pressed it gently to his chest. And then, she opened her wings, wide, and gathered the wind. She took flight, not alone. The hatchlings followed, their small bodies spinning joyously around her. Other dragons joined, slipping through the open gates of the observation deck, a great migration into the starlit. Elric walked to the edge and watched them soar, heart-song thrumming through the walls of the ship. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't need to, because Kayla had brought him home, not to a place, but to a purpose, to a sky filled with wings that once could not fly, to a family that began with a broken dragon and a man who refused to walk away. And as they soared together into the stars, Elric Mon smiled, finally, completely, knowing he had fixed the most important thing in the universe. Not a machine, a future,